In 2016, I sat down to write a book called The Road to Somewhere. You just mentioned it, where I talk about the education-based value divides that have disrupted our politics in recent times, that have led to Brexit, Trump 1 and Trump 2. And I coined these terms, the people that see the world from anywhere and the people that see the world from somewhere, and they kind of caught on and went into the political vocabulary a bit. I actually started writing the book just before the Brexit vote in 2016, and I finished writing it in November, just after the Trump victory in the 2016 US presidential election. So it was very well timed. It was, I mean, I guess it was a sort of an attempt at a sort of sympathetic understanding of what one might loosely call populism, of why people in apparently, rich, successful, free democratic societies, why so many people felt sufficiently pissed off that they did things like voting for Brexit and Trump, that the kind of the established elites found incomprehensible, and it was my attempt at an explanation. It came out relatively early in 2017, and so the timing was very good. People were looking around for a sort of general explanation for what had happened, and so it sold pretty well. It very briefly got into the bestseller list. It was It was at number 10 in the list for just 1 week, but that was enough to you can stick bestseller on the paperback edition. But anyway, just to explain the anywhere and somewhere difference in a little bit more detail. So, because the theme kind of runs through the subsequent two books, to how society has got out of kilter in certain respects. I mean, we still live in very good societies. Most people on the planet would love to live in a country like the modern UK, but they didn't. At least if they come from the poorer world. But a lot of things have got out of kilter, and a lot of these things actually apply to similar countries to us. It's not a peculiarly UK thing. But so I talked about essentially the over-dominance of one worldview, the anywhere worldview. The anywhere worldview is the worldview of people who tend to be highly educated, and particularly in the UK, actually not even really the UK, particularly in England, that is often associated with mobility early in your life, because we have a residential university system, and it's an unusually high proportion of university students leave home and the place that the friends they grew up with and so on, move to often 200 miles away, different town, different city, and they sort of and they get used to that. Mobility is sort of part of their life story often, and with that sort of mobility, highly educated people mixing among themselves, you can see how certain what one might call sort of guardianish values and attitudes tend to get embedded in their worldview. That they tend to be relatively open. They tend to favour openness. They're not at all discomforted by mass immigration, say, but partly because they've sort of lost connection to particular places and groups of people. So that combination of sort of mobility and openness and comfort with change makes it very hard for them, I think, to understand the other large value group that I call the somewheres, who often feel very differently about these things. Now, anywheres, I should say, I invented the labels, by the way. I didn't invent the value groups. I mean, I spent a lot of time with my nose in things like the British social attitude surveys and opinion surveys. I mean, these groups really do exist out there. I mean, one can argue about the particular proportions that I attributed to them. I mean, I talked at the time about anywheres representing about 25-30% of the population. Somewheres maybe more like 45-50%. And there's quite a big, what I called in-betweener group. I mean, people who sort of share quite a lot of both worldviews. So the somewheres, who are a majority but much less vocal in our society, much less powerful in our society, tend to be less well educated, tend to place much greater attachment to the places they come from, the groups they belong to, and therefore are much more prone to feel discomforted by rapid change, wherever it comes from. It might be the gentrification of the place they live, or it might be the fact that suddenly the streets fill up with people, who look differently to them or speak a different language or whatever. So, they're not necessarily xenophobic. No doubt some are, but, it's just discomfort with change, a preference for the familiar, which is a pretty strong human trait after all. And obviously a lot of anywheres share that too in many respects, although their sort of professed ideology sort of cuts against it. And actually one of the useful, I borrowed this term from the American sociologist Volker Parsons, who talked about our identities being on a spectrum between achieved and ascribed, that all of us have a combination of the two, but anywheres tend to have a sense of themselves which derives in large part from their own achievements. They've done well at school, they've gone to a more or less good university, they have a more or less successful professional career, and that, by the way, is part of the problem in a way with the anywhere domination of our society, that progress through life has come to be seen as the sort of ideal type. And for many people, it's either not desired or not possible to achieve. So kind of where does that leave them? But anyway, so the anywheres have an identity which skews towards the achieved end of the spectrum, while the somewheres tend to have a worldview that is more skewed towards the ascribed, meaning that their sense of themselves comes from things about them that are probably pretty immutable. You're a white male working class Geordie, say. Most of those things you cannot change about yourself, and your sense of yourself is more firmly built on those immutable aspects of your background than anywhere. And I should emphasise that both of these worldviews, at least in their mainstream form, there is a xenophobic end of the somewheres, and there's a sort of citizens of nowhere end of the anywheres. But in their mainstream form, both of these worldviews are perfectly decent. The problem is, in our society, and the problem that has created the kind of backlash, the populist backlash, the Brexits, the Trumps, is the fact that one of them is over-dominant, particularly the last sort of 25, 30 years or so. And I think what you've seen is a kind of merger of, particularly since the huge expansion of higher education in the UK and most other comparable countries in the last 20 or 30 years, a kind of merger of the cognitive meritocracy, if you like, the people with high cognitive ability, the ability to process information easily, essentially a kind of IQ type exam passing intelligence. Those people from whatever background have merged in, as I see it, with the more established elites. Those established elites have also become very adept at getting their children through the sort of cognitive meritocracy over that hurdle, often with the help of private schools or private tutors or whatever, even if they're of only average intelligence. So you've had, and I think this crosses centre left and centre right. I mean, certainly the anywhere over domination of our politics, you could see it just as much, say, in New Labour, indeed perhaps rather more in something like a phenomenon like New Labour. I mean, it was Tony Blair, after all, who made that famous and I think rather disastrous speech in 1999 saying that 50% of school leavers should go to university. And it was clear nobody in Tony Blair's entourage, people in the education world who were helping him write that speech, had any sense that their own children might be in the 50% and were not going to university. And I think there is a kind of one of our political problems has been a kind of lack of emotional intelligence, a lack of empathy on the part of anywheres to understand. They've been far too easy. I think it may be receding a bit now, but far too easy to reach for the kind of racism, nativist, xenophobic button when people are expressing it's essentially mainstream somewhere assumptions about the importance of the nation state, or wanting immigration to be kept to moderate levels. The importance of the distinction between the citizen and non-citizen. I think one of the things that was particularly offended people about free movement, wasn't just, say, competition in the labour market or extra pressure on on public resources, public infrastructure, all of that was part of it. I think it was the idea that you could come here and from day one have all the rights of a UK citizen, bar voting in national elections, or serving on juries, a few trivial things. And I think that sort of sense that you didn't sort of earn your sense of citizenship was particularly offensive. But anyway, I mean, a whole range of policies that were that were essentially designed, again, whether it was a centre-left government or a centre-right government, policies that were designed for people of high cognitive ability or people who were already part of a kind of established elite. And some of this sort of, you could say, reinforces a kind of left-right argument, and some of the more traditional social class arguments, some of the kind of things that animated politics for most of the post-war period. But some of these things created a new sort of cultural divides that often disparagingly described as sort of authoritarian versus liberal, open versus closed. Tony Blair used to like talking about open versus closed. And to which my response is, I've never met anybody who wants to live in a closed society, but a lot of people felt that the forms of openness that had evolved, from the kind of globalization period onwards, from the kind of late 80s, early 90s onwards, that the forms of openness were not serving their interests.
Marketing agencies, listen up. I know you're stressed, so I'm gonna let you do less work and get better results. I'm talking about Ad Creative AI. I wanna show you some of my favorite features. Paste your landing page, and then in just a few steps, Ad Creative AI will have enough information to generate hundreds of ad creative. Check out the ad text. Each one has a copywriting method that you're familiar with, and they even have suggested audiences. And now you have your complete strategy and asset for your client. This is the text projects feature. Obviously, they're gonna generate you some compelling ad copy that's focused on driving results. They have over 250 million ad texts and headlines, which is way more than you and I could read in our lifetime. This is your brand CTR score compared to your competitors, your ad fatigue, and even best performing colors, labels, and ad text, as well as your top creatives. They even turned this into a PDF so you can send it directly to your clients. You can now sell Ad Creative AI to your clients while making it look like your own internal tool with your own colors and logo. If you're interested in any of these sweet new features, check out Ad Creative AI's agency package.
Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.